this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. On this week's video, we're continuing with our ongoing series, the emergency broadcast regarding the Division of Workers' Compensation's recent discipline of over 400 qualified medical evaluators. And today, this is actually session number 6 in this series. And I never thought it would take as many as 6 sessions to adequately cover this ongoing saga of the denied and disciplined qualified medical evaluators. But it seems that new information is coming out almost daily that sheds new light or a new angle on the situation. And what I want to share with you today is going to blow your mind, and it's going to completely alter the perspective that we've established over the prior 5 sessions. Now, over our prior 5 sessions, we've talked about how dirty, how mean, and how nasty the Division of Workers' Compensation is, and how rude and cruel it is for them to initiate a new interpretation of the complexity factors under CCR 9795, and how cruel and mean it is for them to impose discipline on poor, unsuspecting, hardworking, and well-intentioned qualified medical evaluators, and how the Division of Workers' Compensation is going to get their just desserts sooner or later, eventually even in a court of law. Well, what I want to share with you today is going to blow your mind and shed some light on the other side of the story. So before we get into that, let me just reestablish the context of this situation. It's now established fact that over 400, and the number continues to grow. It's probably many times grown. Many more hundreds of doctors have been added to the list. And even as of today's broadcast, the Division of Workers' Compensation is continuing to deny doctors. They're continuing with their modus operandi of denying doctors their QME reappointments. So who knows what the number is, but it's at least 400, and I suspect it may be as many as 800 to 1,000 doctors have been denied reappointment as qualified medical evaluators after the Division of Workers' Compensation has investigated a series or a group of each of these doctors' reports and determined that these doctors have overbilled their reports due to misuse of the complexity factors. And even before the Division of Workers' Compensation conducts an investigation of the doctor's report, the doctor comes to the attention of the Division of Workers' Compensation through what's referred to as a complaint. So the doctor gets issued a complaint by one or more of the parties, and that complaint sits in the doctor's file at the Division of Workers' Compensation until such time as the doctor's renewal is due. And then when the renewal is due, the Division of Workers' Compensation then initiates an investigation of the doctor's reports. So if that's the sequence of events, let me ask you, what is it, and who is it, and how is it that a complaint would become initiated against a qualified medical evaluator? Who would complain against a qualified medical evaluator, and why would they complain against a qualified medical evaluator? Well, what's becoming now known as more and more reports become available for review, it's now becoming apparent that the complaints are being issued against the qualified medical evaluators because the reports that they're submitting and charging premium dollars for, charging ML 104 level fees for, are poor reports. Not only are they poor reports, they're bottom of the barrel reports. They're the worst reports in our industry. They're the poorest reflection of the types of work that we do as qualified medical evaluators. And they're reports that don't resolve the disputed issues. And they're reports that are way overbilled for the amount of substantive content contained within the reports. In other words, these are the crappiest reports being produced in our profession at the same time that the doctors are charging the highest fees for these crappy reports. And it's these crappy reports that spark the complaint and bring the doctor to the attention of the Division of Workers' Compensation. And then the Division of Workers' Compensation requests the last 10 reports from that doctor, and their investigation reveals that crappy reports are a pattern and practice for the doctor. Now, I'm not referring to any specific doctors here, and I have on my desk a growing pile of reports from doctors who have been disciplined, who have asked me to review their reports and comment on their reports and explain the problems within their reports. And there is a pattern and practice within all of these reports, and I'm going to share with you some of the elements that are raising suspicion and raising complaints from the parties. So I want to ask you this question. Is it possible that the Division of Workers' Compensation could have a valid point? Is it possible that doctors are overbilling for non-substantive reports? Is it possible that doctors are misusing the complexity factors and are artificially elevating and escalating the reports to the higher billing levels when those reports don't qualify for the higher billing levels? Is it possible? Yes, it's not only possible, that's actually what's happened. Now, we can argue all day long about the Division of Workers' Compensation and their dictatorial punishments of doctors without so much as even providing the opportunity for a hearing. And we could argue all day long about the Division of Workers' Compensation's new interpretation of causation as a complexity factor and their new interpretation of the ML 104. And it's my opinion that the Division of Workers' Compensation is probably being overreactionary to this crisis, but we could argue about these things all day long. Some of those issues are going to be resolved very soon on December 7th when the Division of Workers' Compensation comes into court after being sued by 3 of the denied and disciplined doctors. So some of those matters are going to be resolved legally. For now, and for today's discussion, I want to focus in on us. I want to focus in on our reports. I want to focus in on what is the cause of the complaints and what is the cause of the anger down at the Division of Workers' Compensation regarding these specific reports and regarding these specific doctors. So, as I said, I have a growing pile of reports that I've reviewed on my desk, and I want to share with you some of the things that they have in common that are red flags and bringing these doctors to the attention of the Division of Workers' Compensation. So, the first red flag that I've noticed in the reports that I'm receiving is that doctors, many QMEs are working for third-party medical management groups. These are groups that take the intake call when a new appointment comes in. They schedule the examinee. They prepare the appointment notification form. They send correspondence to all the parties, and they manage the case for the qualified medical evaluator, including sending out the QME's report and sending out the billing associated with the QME's report. Now, I myself personally have experience working with these third-party groups. I worked with a third-party group for approximately 4 years. And as far as I know, everything went well, and there were no problems. However, I do remember with each and every report that I issued that there was a momentary period of unease or dis-ease as I electronically emailed my report to the third-party group for that third party to print out the report, to prepare the billing, and to serve the report on all parties. There is a moment in time when you use these third-party groups where the report is out of your direct control. And I remember myself always being a little bit uneasy and always wondering if anything untoward was happening to my reports. And it seems that perhaps these doctors that are working for third-party companies are having their billing modified by the third party at the billing level so as to maximize the dollars amount billed per report. So that seems to make sense, doesn't it? Don't these third-party companies want to make as much money as possible? Of course they do. Would they rather send out a report as an ML104 at $250 an hour? Or would they rather send out a report at an ML103 or an ML102, which they have to split with the doctor and receive very, very low fees per case? It seems that some of these third parties themselves are escalating the reports without the doctor's knowledge and adding complexity factors and adding modifiers to the reports to artificially escalate the value of the report, unbeknownst to the doctor. And interestingly, one of the doctors named in the upcoming lawsuit is a doctor who works for a third-party company, and he is claiming innocence about his billing level, claiming that he had no participation at all in the billing level of his report, and that the billing level of his report was orchestrated entirely by the third-party company, the supervisor or the administrator of the third-party company. Well, unfortunately, since it's the doctor's name on the bottom of the report, it's he who signed the report, he's responsible for every single aspect of the report. And simply because that report is billed by a third person or a third party does not in any way exonerate the doctor from errors contained within that billing. And I've seen this theme with other doctors as well. It seems that the third-party companies are sometimes modifying or making suggestions to the doctor about the billing level of the report and getting some of these reports onto the desk of the Division of Workers' Compensation. Now, it's interesting. There seems to be two components of the billing errors that we're seeing. And up till now, in sessions 1 through 5, we've limited our discussion of billing errors to misuse of the complexity factors. Misuse of the complexity factors. And we'll talk about a couple key complexity factors in a minute. Well, it seems that there's a new breed, an additional breed of overbilling that has to do with misuse of the modifiers. Misuse of the modifiers. And some doctors are guilty of misusing the complexity factors and simultaneously misusing the modifiers. So with regards to the modifiers, you know we have modifier -93 for when an interpreter is present. This modifier allows for a 10% pay increase. We have modifier -94, which is used in the case of an agreed medical evaluation. This provides for a 25% increase. And when these two modifiers are used in conjunction, the -93 and the -94, that allows for a 35% increase of the doctor's normal billing rate. So the perfect scheme involves billing a report at an ML104 billing level, the highest billing level, and then adding both the 93 and the 94 modifiers in cases where the report does not qualify for an ML104 and there actually was no interpreter present, and the evaluation was not an agreed medical evaluation. And I have reports on my desk where the doctor billed the evaluation as an agreed medical evaluation when the doctor was not an agreed medical evaluator at all. So in this instance, we have a circumstance where there's misuse both of the complexity factors and also of the modifiers. Well, the Division of Workers' Compensation is checking up on this stuff to make sure that things are billed according to what actually happened. Now, let's talk for a couple minutes about these modifiers. One of the reports that I have on my desk, and I want to share with you today, I have it right here, is a doctor who was disciplined and denied reappointment application because, as we said earlier, his reports received a complaint, and then once the DWC had the complaint, the DWC initiated an investigation. Well, what was the source of the complaint? Interesting question. Well, it's right here. This doctor was working for a third-party company, and the third-party company insisted to the doctor that the evaluation qualified for the use of the -94 modifier, not for an agreed medical evaluation, but for an agreed panel qualified medical evaluation. Now, this doctor was quite surprised when I told him that the agreed panel qualified medical evaluator, the APQME, went out in 2013 when the complexity factors were revised. We no longer have the APQME. The APQME came out of Labor Code 4062, which was modified in 2013. We no longer have an APQME. We only have an agreed medical evaluation or a panel qualified medical evaluation. And when I told that to this doctor, he argued with me and he insisted that no, he was the last man standing after a strike process. Therefore, the parties had agreed to use him from the panel. As if being the last man standing is somehow constitutes some form of an agreement, which it's not. And many doctors, not just this doctor, many doctors have told me this, that they consider themselves the agreed panel qualified medical evaluator when they're the last man standing. And you're not. The APQME went out in 2013. You cannot bill with the -94 modifier unless you're the actual agreed medical evaluator. But this doctor, he billed his report with the -94 modifier for the agreed panel QME on top of an ML 104 at $4,500, and then with the interpreter modifier, the report jumped from $4,500 to $6,075. For this, the Division of Workers' Compensation reduced the report to ML 103 at $937.50 and demanded $5,137.50 restitution from this doctor. A significant pain, a bite or a poke to the ribs. But it was the doctor's own fault for misuse, at least of the modifier. Well, as it turns out, these two cases that I want to share with you today also have many other misuses that have brought their reports to the attention of the Division of Workers' Compensation. Why? Because they sparked a complaint by one or more of the parties. So you might ask yourself, what is it about a report that could spark a complaint? How is it that these reports are getting complained about to the parties? Well, let's go over some of those reasons, and I'm going to ask you to take a good hard look at your reports so that you can eliminate the possibility of your reports ever being the subject of a complaint. Okay? Now, for our first example of overbilling and report problems, let's just remember that CCR 9795 requires some very specific documentation from us in our report. Specifically, it says in a separate section at the beginning of the report, okay? So where should the separate section be? It should be at the beginning of the report. What should be at the beginning of the report? A separate section, okay? In a separate section at the beginning of the report, the physician shall clearly and concisely specify which of the complexity factors were required for the evaluation, comma, and the circumstances which made those complexity factors applicable to the evaluation. That's 2 requirements. Well, actually 3. Number 1, that we have a separate section. Number 2, that we list the complexity factors. And then number 3, not that we just list them, that we explain why those complexity factors were necessary for this evaluation. And doctors are doing poor job at this. Some doctors are doing no job at this. And one of these reports that I have on my desk is an example of a doctor who didn't have a separate section, didn't list the complexity factors, didn't explain the necessity of the complexity factors, but had no problem submitting a bill for $13,222. $13,222 with no specific section, no listing of the complexity factors, no explanation as to why the complexity factors were necessary, and this is the type of report that sparks a complaint. Okay? So you need to have a separate section where you list the complexity factors and you explain to the parties why those complexity factors were necessary. Now, one of the things that I tell doctors is to do a good job in explaining your use of the complexity factors. When you think about the entirety of your report, which sections of your report should be the absolute masterpiece sections of your report? Is it your review of systems section? Is it your social history section? Is it your work restrictions section of your report? No. The sections of your report that demand your best attention, your most focused work, are the sections that deal with the complexity factors. So that when the reader of your report sees that you're using the complexity factors and reads your reasoning as to why the complexity factors are necessary, and then goes to that section of your report, they look at that section of your report, such as the review of records section of your report, such as the causation section of your report, such as the apportionment section of your report. They look at that section of your report and they go, wow, what a perfect explanation. That's exactly right. I get it. I buy it. I'm going to work with it. I accept that opinion. It should be fabulous. It should be a masterpiece. It should be well reasoned. It should be laid out perfectly with bullet points and reasons. Focus on the complexity factor sections of your report. These doctors did no job, did a poor job. One doctor here billed for the causation complexity factor and didn't even discuss causation. Invoked the causation complexity factor, and then when you turn to the causation section of the report, it simply says discussion of causation is deferred. And yet, the doctor bills $13,000 for an ML-104. And that's the reason why the Division of Workers' Compensation is upside down. Okay? Now, other errors and omissions that these reports are putting forth, all in unison, all collectively, all in common, is that the doctors do a poor job or no job in documenting any of the complexity factors. So we know that face-to-face time is one of the complexity factors. Neither of the doctors document their face-to-face time. There's no indication as to what the start time was. There's no indication as to what the stop time was. There's no sign-in sheet from the examinee with initials at the start time and the stop time. There's no documentation. Let me ask you, if someone did some work at your house and came up and wanted to be paid for A, B, C, D, E, cleaning the gutters, mowing the grass, cleaning the fireplace, vacuuming, cleaning the carpet, wouldn't you want some evidence that each one of those activities had been done before you pay hard-earned money for each of those activities? These doctors are providing no support and no documentation for any of the complexity factors. So with the face-to-face time, always include a copy of the examinee sign-in and sign-out sheet and reference it within the body of your report. Similarly, with review of records, these doctors provide no documentation of review of records as a complexity factor. So let's talk about review of records as a complexity factor briefly here. In this one report that I have here for you, this is a 54-page report. Of the 54 pages, over 40 pages is involved with apparently what this doctor considers to be a review of records. 40 pages are involved with reviewing records. Now, so that means the entirety of the report is basically 14 pages, including the demographic data at the beginning and the declarations at the end. The meat of the report is only about 13 pages. Now, let me ask you, what's involved with a review of records? What's involved with review of records? How do you do your review of records? How do you report the review of records in your report? This doctor simply recapitulated the entirety of every medical document that he received. In other words, this 40 pages contains all the medical records with the spaces, the line spaces, removed. The doctor could have simply scanned those documents into this report and saved hours and hours and hours of typing the entirety of each and every medical record into the body of the report. Now, many doctors don't know this, but the review of records procedure is governed by no fewer than 4 laws. There's 2 labor codes and 2 codes of regulation that tell us exactly what constitutes a review of records. A review of records qualifies as a complexity factor because it requires complex medical decision making. According to the 2 labor codes and the 2 codes of regulation that govern the review of records, the responsibility of the qualified medical evaluator is to read the medical records and extract from the medical records relevant data, key data, important information upon which opinions and conclusions later in the report can be based. This doctor simply recapitulates the entirety of the document. She doesn't summarize it. She doesn't extract from it key data. Nowhere in the report does she refer back to information within specific records. It's simply a recapitulation of hundreds of documents that takes 40 pages to include within the body of the report, and that does not qualify as a review of records. The review of records is a complexity factor because it's complex. We're asking you as the qualified medical evaluator to review all the records and extract from all this voluminous material the important information that contribute to your opinions and conclusions later on in the report. It's in the review of records where you show the parties your cards so that later on in the report, when you provide your opinions and conclusions, you can refer back to the cards so they can see where you got the data and the information upon which your opinions and conclusions later are based. These doctors simply recapitulate the entire document, and that does not qualify as a review of records, especially when there's a charge of 29 hours for the review of records. And this is work that can be done by a monkey if you could teach a monkey simply to type the records into your own report. This does not require complex decision making. This is simply an example of busy work that can be done by any secretary in any office anywhere. Okay? So there's no documentation of the review of records as a complexity factor. There is poor or absent documentation of causation as a complexity factor in both of these reports. In both of these reports. In this one particular report, the doctor does not cite causation as a complexity factor. He simply describes a great number of hours involved with reviewing records, reviewing testing, reviewing my prior report, and doing discussion, including addressing issues of causation, apportionment, further treatment, and work status. What does further treatment and work status have to do with any complexity factor? Where is the complexity factor of causation clearly elaborated on in a separate section at the beginning of the report? This is a poor demonstration of causation as a complexity factor. So we know that the causation complexity factor requires a written request from the party or parties requesting the report. Nowhere here does this doctor, and nowhere here does this doctor. This doctor doesn't even describe causation. Oh, here he says causation of injury as requested by party in writing, but does not provide us with copies of the written requests for addressment of causation. So how can you support your causation complexity factor? You support your causation complexity factor by demonstrating to the parties your written request. You provide copies of the written request with your report. You make references to the written request within the body of your report in the separate section at the beginning of your report. You reference the questions that request an addressment of causation from the written request in the body of your report. Then, when the parties go to the causation section of your report, in that section of your report, you then answer the questions provided in the written request. Make sense? That way you fully support your causation as a complexity factor. This doctor, if we go to the causation section, you can see that the causation section is one sentence. It says, causation : these issues will be addressed when Mr. Jones's condition has stabilized at a maximal medical improvement for rating purposes. And that's the discussion of causation, for which the doctor invoked causation as a complexity factor, which qualified the report as an ML 104, which allowed the doctor to bill up to $13,000 for this report. And it's for this reason that this report ended up on the desk of the Division of Workers' Compensation, because the reader of the report had to complain. They had to complain. The doctor's invoking causation as a complexity factor, and there's no discussion at all of causation in the report. Okay? Now, let me just make one more comment and we'll wrap this up. So, it seems that the doctors that are being disciplined have it coming. They have it coming, because they're submitting reports that are billing for elements not contained within the report. Right? Right? So they have this coming. Well, it's also my observation that many doctors are having difficulty transitioning from their clinical practice into the medical legal workers' compensation. So this report was requested to give the doctor an opportunity to investigate apportionment as new dates of injury became known. Well, it seemed that the doctor missed that entire point, that the purpose of the evaluation was to address apportionment. And the doctor went on to do his usual evaluation and administer his usual number of tests that he would do on an initial evaluation, and never addressed apportionment at all, and seemed confused about the purpose of the evaluation on a big picture basis. And in fact, the doctor confounded the whole problem by declaring the examinee now to be not permanent and stationary, when before he had declared the examinee to be permanent and stationary. He gave no opinion on apportionment because he declared the examinee to be not permanent and stationary. He provided an opinion on causation by saying these issues will be addressed when Mr. Jones has stabilized at a maximum medical improvement for rating purposes, when he had previously declared the examinee to be at maximum medical improvement, and he had provided a permanent impairment rating. And it seems that this template is not customized to the examinee at all. It's simply generic. It's not related to the specific examinee, and it's not related to the issues that are in dispute. So many of these reports that doctors are issuing are not resolving the disputed issues, but the doctors are still charging premium dollars and overbilling their reports for high fees when the report does no one any good. And these are the reports that are ending up on the desk of the Division of Workers' Compensation. I think you get the point. The point of today's discussion is that collectively as a group, our reports need to continue to get better. We need to continue to focus on the big picture involved with each of our evaluations and comport our procedures to resolve whatever the big picture issue in dispute is. Many of these reports are simply nonsensical reports that don't help anyone, and yet the doctors insist on billing huge sums of money for these basically worthless reports. So we need to continue to improve our reports. We need to continue to get better at supporting each and every one of the complexity factors for which we expect to get paid. Otherwise, the Division of Workers' Compensation will be right down our neck, and rightfully so. They should be upset at reports that don't comply and aren't properly itemized. So we need to continue to improve our reporting and our evaluations in general. So the bad news with today's discussion is that perhaps, and I'm not the judge, but perhaps the doctors who've been denied their reappointment and have been disciplined by the Division of Workers' Compensation deserved it. They actually had it coming. They had it coming for many, many reasons, not the least of which is that they're producing crappy work that no one can use and that are improperly billed. And these doctors had it coming. And I don't want that to happen to us. And I don't want that to happen to you. So even though this is a bit of a sober and sombering discussion, I hope this discussion helps you. And I hope there's some takeaways here that you can use to keep yourself out of hot water with the Division of Workers' Compensation. So this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. Look forward to being with you on future sessions as well. And for now, I'm wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.